So, welcome again to another enlightening episode of the Agile Matrix podcast, where we delve deep into the dynamic world of Agile frameworks and product development. I'm thrilled to have with us today Ben Maynard, awesome host of the Product Agility podcast, a seasoned expert in the realm of agility and innovation. Now, in this episode today, we're exploring the cornerstone of modern business success. What is that? Product agility. So join us as we unravel the intricacies of fostering agility within organizations, unlocking pathways to adaptability, responsiveness, and ultimately sustainable growth. So get ready to gain invaluable insights as Ben shares his wealth of experience, knowledge on how organizations can traverse the agile landscape, harnessing its principles to thrive in an ever-evolving market. So, like I always tell you, grab your favorite beverage, grab your pen, grab your paper, get your iPad, get ready. Stay tuned as we navigate through the realms of product agility, uncovering practical strategies, real-world examples, and actionable advice to empower you on your agile journey. So let's dive deep into this and uncover the secrets of achieving unparalleled product agility. So everybody, let's welcome Ben to the podcast. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you very much for such a lovely introduction. I should have been making notes myself. I had my beverage, but I did not have my note-taking apparatus. So yes, I'll be listening back to this and making some notes, getting some tips. That's a lovely intro. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ben. You're so kind. Thank you for coming on the podcast. It's an honor to have you on the podcast, and thank you for responding. Interestingly, when I started the podcast, I might have reached out to you and you were so gracious to just when you responded, I was like, wow, okay. He's responding. Okay, that's good. So I'm really glad to have you here. Really honored to have you on the podcast. So the first question I have, which I'm sure I've listened to a couple of your podcasts, and I think you asked this question a lot of times as well, which is introduce yourself to our listeners. I'm sure they all know you, but just for the sake of fulfilling our righteousness, let's introduce yourself to us.
Well, I'll keep it brief. My name is Ben Maynard. I have been working in digital product creation. Okay, so specifically use the word creation because I dislike the word delivery. Maybe we'll come to that later. For around 15 to 20 years, when I was at university and it came to the final year, our goal was to find a client, find a problem in that client, design some software, create the software, and then deliver it, and write a 10,000 word dissertation to go along with it. So I chose something at the time which there wasn't much written about it. I managed to find one book on it. It was something called TDD. And so I used test-driven development as the hypotheses that I was testing in my dissertation. So my introduction to Agile started way back then in university, 20 years ago.
Wow.
And it set me up in many ways. It gave me a different perspective. When I actually then got into working professional software creation teams, I realized that the reality of things was very, very much different. But there was a beautiful, what's the word I'm looking for? Pressure and realism to working as part of a team and creating something. So I spent many years working as part of software creation teams, and then as a product owner, agile coach, scrum master, and worked my way through the ranks in large banks such as NatWest as it is now, and then Deutsche Bank, where I ended up being a director, helping to design and lead the adoption of a new operating model, which was based around large-scale Scrum.
Okay.
Then I left Deutsche Bank because I just was having prolonged periods of joylessness. Something that I've suffered from all my life. It wasn't something that was particularly unique to this kind of the job at Deutsche Bank, but I just found it very hard to be happy. And then so for my own mental health and for the benefit of my family, I decided to stop being a full-time employee and start a business about 3 months before COVID struck. And thankfully managed to make a good thrust of running a business, did well throughout COVID, and now find myself here talking to you, the founder of my company called Sheave, and we offer various agile training, coaching, facilitation, large-scale Scrum, and many other great courses coming on. Also the host of the podcast, as you mentioned, co-founder of a software product which should be out hopefully in July, August time. Also co-founder of a little marketing company that we're just starting to offer social media marketing services using AI to certain people as well. And I think there's one other thing. I can't remember, but yeah. So I'm busy. I'm really busy,
I
but
can see that.
I'm happier, and I'm really excited to be on the other side of the podcast equation for the next half an hour or so.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you for that. And listeners, in the description of the podcast, you find all of Ben's links, the companies he mentioned, all that is, and I'll put the links in the description. And you see it on the screen as well. So just stay tuned for that. So thank you very much for that, Ben. Just before I go into the questions that I have listed here, you mentioned something about product creation and product delivery.
Mm.
Can you explain? You say you don't like the idea of product delivery?
I like disagreeing with people.
Mm.
I love people. I like disagreeing because I enjoy a real, what's the word I'm looking for? Rigorous debate about some stuff. And I'm happy to
Yes.
have my opinion changed, man.
Mm-hmm.
I firmly believe in strong opinions held loosely. I don't think I hold some of mine as loosely as perhaps I should, but I think so much of my career was about delivery.
Mm.
When I started in the Agile community, when I think back about 15 years, people talk about end-to-end feature delivery cycle time.
Yeah.
The last 3 or 4 years, since I've been spending more and more time hanging out with really esteemed people in the product world, I think that my attitude has changed because it isn't about delivery. It isn't about just like delivering a letter, as an
Mm.
example. We're not post people delivering stuff to people. We are creating something here. And through that act of creation, we're then handing it over to someone in the hope that they find it valuable enough to change their behaviors and
Mm.
carry on using this thing in a different
Mm-hmm.
way than they have been using something previously. And for me, that's why creation is so much more, I think, relevant a term to use, because we are creating new things. This is a form of art in many respects. So when
Mm.
it comes to understanding users, understanding their behaviors, understanding current market trends, when it comes to then manifesting that into some form of hypotheses, to then people to sit down and do the really hard work of actually taking this nebulous, weird idea, a line on a backlog of some form of document, and actually turning it into something that other humans can interact with. For me, delivery just falls short of really explaining just what
Mm.
that's about. And as soon as you're talking about delivery, people will know when it's delivered. And I think that's when we start measuring how long it takes to deliver something.
Yeah.
And I think if we begin to change our language, we can begin to change people's opinions of things, because it isn't about, as I mentioned, the end-to-end
Mm.
average end-to-end cycle time of delivering something. Actually, we want to create it, but what we want to understand is what's the lead time from when we began that creation process to when we've actually confirmed that users actually using it in some way, whether that's the same or different to how we hypothesize, but actually validating that. Because lots of organizations that I've worked in always had a very hard delineation between tech and the business.
Mm.
And it's a
Yes.
classic
Yeah.
supply and demand model.
Mm-hmm.
So the business want you to deliver something. Tech are focused on delivering something. So we time up until the point it's delivered, but no one can actually ensured that it was the thing that we had created was actually hitting the mark or not. And so I think actually we need to kind of change the story a little bit to say, yeah, lead time from when we thought of it to actually when we're validating how it's being used, and how do we take that data and then feed it back in to that cycle. So that's a long answer. I apologize, but
No, no, no.
I think for me, creation and actually validating what we've created is a much more applicable term to just talking about delivery.
Mm. Do you know what's making me so happy is that what you're saying is what I won't say I stumbled upon, but recently I started thinking again about so agility is all about complex space, right? So that means what we're even trying to build, we don't know if it's the right thing. So that means because I realized that a lot of organizations, like you mentioned it, the feedback loop is incomplete because we hypothesize. We say, oh, let's do this is the solution to the problem that we think, or we have a problem statement and we think this is a solution. So we build stuff. But a lot of times we just shoot them out there. We're like, yay, and then we shoot something else. But we don't, at least a lot of organizations don't complete that feedback loop to go, was it the right thing actually? Should
Mm.
we pivot from there? Because for a lot of time, for a lot of organizations, a lot of agile, how we do it really, we load that on the product owner and the sprint review. But all they confirm is, yeah, what we hypothesize as we should build is what you built. But we still need to get it out there to then go to the customer and go, is it the right thing? Should we have even built it in the first place? Or if we have, should we build upon it or pivot away from it completely?
And that's one of the interesting things I found about the sprint review. And this is not a popular thing that I'm about to suggest, but I'd like to suggest it anyway, which is if you want an interesting metric, then measure how many of the things that you deliver in a sprint, if you are using Scrum, are actually used by the users or customers in the sprint review. All right, forget like the team's done an amazing job. They did an amazing job. If you want to know if they've done a truly amazing job, then are the users or customers able to use it? And instead of the team demoing it to other people, why don't the users and customers demo it? Yeah, let's flip the focus of that a little bit and say that let's try and validate what we've done here. And I think that's a very scary suggestion for many, but it's one of the few things that I find does help people change their opinion away from just let's get something delivered.
Yeah. I think Scrum.org, their EBM metrics, I think there's an attempt to do something like that to elevate the metrics game from just like you said, getting out there quick, cycle time. Yay, it's down to 5 days. Woo, yay, everything is. But actually, is it the right thing? You know, there's an attempt because I'm looking at here. You look at the current value, unrealized value, ability to innovate, time to market. So they're looking at elevating that conversation to a higher level. Well, it's really powerful. It's like I told you guys, Ben is the awesome Ben. You know?
I stand on the shoulder of giants, if I'm honest with you. You know, there are some great people that have mentored me over the years and some great people that I've known. And I'm fortunate enough to call a few of those people my friends now. But I don't think I would have the same level of insight if it wasn't for people like Craig Larman, who, you know, me and Craig, I don't think we'd ever class each other as friends. But he's also been incredibly courteous to me. People like Gord Kowadzik, creative impact mapping and specification by example, Boz Vodder, Radhika Dutt, you know, these types of people who I've had fortunate enough to spend time with and become friends with a couple of them, you know, they have really influenced everything that I do. So yeah, I'm only as awesome as the people whose shoulders that I stand upon.
That's very true. That's very true. Thank you for that. So now you touched on something I was going to ask, and because when I was thinking about the problem that like you said, the delineation or the separation between the business and the delivery teams. So my question is, in your experience, how have you been able to, if you come to an organization and you have that, you know, there's the ideation part and there's the delivery part, and they're very separate. How have you been able to, because in there, when you look at it, if you're looking at product agility, we're looking at how quickly you can go from how quickly and then what level of quality from ideation to value created and also value validated. So how have you been able to, you know, help organizations? Because I've seen many organizations that it's 6 months to crystallize an idea, and then the team is handed over to the team, and the team has to quickly deliver something, and then it's thrown back over the fence. So how have you managed that?
So there's a couple of tried and tested ways. I will try and keep this focused. So the first thing that I would generally do, and if I talk about a specific engagement with a client who I can't mention their name, but they are part of a very, very large American company. I was working for a UK wing, and I spent 2 months getting to know all the different parts of the organization. I was brought in as an external, and I just spent time really getting to know everyone, interviewing them, having kind of pseudo coaching conversations with them. And this all led to an exercise where it wasn't value stream mapping, not traditional value stream mapping, but what it was bringing all the right people together to answer one of the fundamental questions that the Agile community, I don't think, has answered very well when they're using frameworks such as Scrum or less. So maybe if they learn about less, from me, maybe they would, but which is not everyone can be involved in everything all the time. It just isn't practical. And the bigger you get, the less practical it gets. And it's very easy for us to only look to our left or our right as to what's happening. So there's an exercise that I run where we lay out effectively the product development lifecycle with the software development lifecycle, just as a very clear set of columns. And then we have a various members of the organization from all the different arenas, from sales, from marketing, from professional services, from the engineering side of things, from the product side of things. And we spent a day walking through how do like chunky new ideas get created.
Okay.
What is the process that we go through? And was able to go through and say, okay, who needs to be involved and when? Is it representatives or is it all of the team? What current artifacts need to be addressed here? What artifacts do we need to begin to look at? Because this was a very, very, very heavily regulated organization. And I think that's where a lot of my career has been spent, as working in these heavily regulated organizations. And we went through and we spent a day and we built up this huge map effectively of how they would like things to be working. It was a mixture of where they were and where they would like to be. And at the end of the day, everyone could step back and say, I can see now where I'm needed. I can see why, from a marketing perspective, for example, why we haven't been able to get any traction with a lot of these things is because we're coming in too early. And creating that visibility was actually enough motivation for them to start making some real significant changes. And if you look at where they are now to where they were, and that was going back 18 months ago, it's a completely different organization.
Wow.
But I think the only reason that whole thing worked is because when we got in the room, they trusted me. So I don't think I could just go in and run it. I'm not charismatic enough, and they're too clever to want to trust me. So like creating a holistic view of how the organization could be, who can be involved in when, which artifacts, just to create that alignment. And then leaving that with them motivated to then go and do something else. Because what we're talking about here, it isn't a knowledge gap.
Yeah.
Right. Like to get ideation at the very beginning, going through to that validation and that feedback loop, it is not a knowledge gap. Knowledge gaps are the kind of things that we can be told and then we're proficient in.
Yeah.
So this is not a knowledge gap. Now, there is an element here to some of it is also a skills gap. Right. Okay. So you can get the knowledge, but you need to practice it. And that we're not going to fill a skills gap in a one-day workshop. It's never going to happen. Right. There are big environmental gaps, things about the current environment which are not conducive to working in this slightly different way. And this workshop helped to highlight that. One of the biggest things it highlighted was that historically the motivation for everyone to work together has never been there. It was not individually beneficial for people to work together. And by seeing the whole value stream, by seeing the product development lifecycle with the software development lifecycle in their context, they began to see how it could be individually beneficial for them to work together. Organizations will always have silos.
Yeah.
The question isn't about getting rid of the silos. The organizations will always have dependencies. It isn't about getting rid of the dependencies. There are very few dependencies you can actually eradicate. I've been wrong in my career when I used to speak about eradicating dependencies. You can't eradicate them. You can change their size and you can change their shape and you can change where they're dealt with so that they're dealt with in more effective ways. And I think we just need to get over the fact that those dependencies and silos will exist and find new ways to work with them. So that was the first way, is creating that bigger view. The second way, which is what we did at Deutsche Bank, where I think, as a consequence of what we did, I think we saved around 50 million euros in the first year.
I can imagine, yeah.
Which was, it was about creating that holistic view, but from taking it from a different perspective and saying, you've got creation, aka delivery on one side, and you've got the strategy and the vision for what needs to be done on the other side. And that's been handed down. In big organizations, stuff gets handed down. You don't get to devise your own destiny of these things. And then what's missing in the middle was some glue to bring these two things together. And so what we did at Deutsche Bank was spend a lot of time devising an operating model. So taking large-scale Scrum as the nucleus for this operating model and looking at the principles and looking at the things that we know can really be beneficial. Things like having very few product backlogs, having very few product owners. These things are really beneficial. And we took that, but then we actually added the things that the organization needed for it to be a success. So we had a talent strategy.
Okay.
We had policies and processes which were enshrined. So it wasn't, you should do impact mapping. There's an agile thing called user story mapping or whatever it might be. It was a policy. It was a process within the operating model. So it wasn't this weird agile thing. It was just part of a new operating model.
Yeah.
And by devising this new operating model, then it was in a language that the business understood. It was in a language that all the people in the organization understood. And whilst there was some new ideas being presented in there, and which were added from the agile world and from the product world, because they were enshrined in an operating model, people felt much more comfortable with it. It was much more familiar. We got less resistance. And so then the second part of that for me is really understand what is the operating model and how can you pitch the changes that you want to make as an operating model change rather than let's do agile.
That's powerful. So instead of just going, oh, we're going to agile, it's like, okay, you're currently doing something. Let's add these things into what you're doing
Yeah, and
to improve stuff.
importantly, let's figure out what we can take away. When we looked at the operating model, we didn't say let's take what you've already got and add some stuff on the side. And this is where Scrum has always gone wrong. I mean, Scrum went wrong in many different ways, too many to list, right? Because of the humans that were involved with it.
Yeah.
And the world's changed a lot since then as well.
True.
Let's not pretend it hasn't. It has changed a lot. And so when you look at large scale Scrum as an example, right? I'm a large scale Scrum trainer. I do love a lot about it. I don't recommend anyone adopts it anymore, but I think everyone should look at how they can use bits of it because I think it's incredibly valuable. We never said, let's take less or Scrum and add it to what was there, like a growth on the side. We said, if we just looked at less and then we figure what we need to add. And anything that doesn't get added just gets left by the wayside. So when we looked at it, and there was, I don't know, I think I got corrected on this the other day, but more than 30 project managers, contract project managers in this area at Deutsche Bank where we were working at the time. We didn't say, what can we do with these 30 project managers? We said, well, we're going to need some of these skills, but like, how will we use those skills and how many people do you think we would need? And I think we got down to about 5. Because we didn't have a project construct. We knew that we had to have a project, what's the word I'm looking for? Some structure around how projects were funded and how we monitored them and how we reported them. We needed that, but we had no internal concept of project. So we said, wait, we want to be a product organization. So let's use projects as a funding mechanism. Let's make that part of our operating model. And then what that meant was if we just had it as a funding mechanism and a reporting mechanism, and we simplified our operating model and our organization to then work with that, there's lots of stuff we didn't need to add. And I think it's, so Scrum, when it's bolted on the side of what's already there, I would guess that for many people, and I think this maybe will resonate with your listeners, it's used as a tool to micromanage for teams and to control people.
Yeah, when used badly, Some people use it as a straitjacket too.
Yeah, it's when it's bolted onto what's already there. It doesn't replace anything. They're just using it as a way to try and meet all of the KPIs and everything and all the promises that have already been made. When people take a fresh look and say, where do we start? What can we, if we're going to use Scrum as an example, and we want to make that work with design thinking, and we want to make that work with UX and user research, and we take these bits here, how do we figure out an operating model that brings them all together holistically? Let's forget what we got for a second. Let's start from scratch again, and let's figure out what we need to add rather than what we need to take away.
Wow. 2 things come to mind. When I started my stuff, when I started talking about the Agile Matrix, it's something I've been talking about for a while. And the idea behind the Agile Matrix is the context will always lead. And there are many ideas, many texts, many tips, many tricks, many frameworks. But you cannot pre-design one for every context you go into. So the idea I've always had is, as an Agile coach, a Scrum Master, product owner, product manager, you have to know enough of these tips and tricks so that when you go into a context, you can then say, I'll take this practice out of this context of this framework because my context needs it for us to achieve what we want to achieve. This practice is fantastic, but we actually have something that does the same. No need to bring that in. So the idea of, almost like a matrix, just different things, So I always think about contextual application of agile thinking or agile ways of working, that the context always lead. That's one. Then 2, there's something you said. You mentioned, we're a product organization. Now, I'm assuming that when you started with them, they were project-based. How did you, because that's a massive change.
Yeah. Well, you have to appreciate that when we started the work at Deutsche Bank, we weren't brought in to bring in less or agile. That was not the goal. The goal was we had a CIO who had been given say been given, maybe he had accepted or pitched for quite a fundamental change in this area of the bank. A huge change. And what you find is when you get new leaders coming into an organization, often they want to make some kind of significant change because they want to make their mark. And we were fortunate that our CIO really wanted to push the amount of change that could be achieved. And the COO, who we'd known for a while, said that I think that me and my friend Saloni, you're the people to help make this happen. And so in real terms, if you look at it, but you compared our department to our peers, our reporting was better. We were more in control of our finances than anybody else. And we had a much lower degree of variance between actually what we were reporting and what the truth was. So as a consequence, in this massive project organization, by not using projects at the creation level, we were in better shape than all of our peers. And we did it because we had the right level of senior support.
I was going to say that.
Right? Yeah, because our CIO and the COO, their optimization goal was different to their peers. And I think this is really important, that when we consider what Agile is used for and maybe what product is used for and all these great techniques, actually, often it is for speed.
Yeah.
People want more stuff out sooner. Our CIO said to the big boss, I want to give you something you don't want in 2 weeks rather than in 6 months.
Very smart.
And we did that. I mean, we went from very, very slow releases to making, I don't know, I can't think how many it was, but it's sometimes 10, 15 releases a day, I think.
Wow.
But that was because we had good people and the right optimization goal. Now, the interesting thing was that, while speed is a thing, and I absolutely get people want to go faster, I think sometimes that also gets in the way. And unless people change their paradigm, the way that they think, then they'll try and get speed through the structures that they've already got. If you looked at Agile in a different way, to your point earlier about the word adaptability, what if we looked at it as our relative speed to adapt? Okay. So if we're in a market where our competition takes 6 months to get anything new out, if we can get something out in 5 months, that isn't necessarily fast. We couldn't say maybe we're really speedy. Maybe we've gone from 7 to 5 months. But if we're able to adapt and not increase our overheads and do it in a way that doesn't cause lots of human pain and anguish and be relatively quicker to adapt than our competition, that's what Agile was all about. It was about that relative speed to adapt, and it's about our competition. So when we just boil it down to let's go faster, let's save costs, that breeds very short-term thinking. Right? And when we begin to say, okay, well, we want to be able to adapt quicker than the competition, and we want to be able to adapt at a reasonably low cost, because otherwise it's not going to be sustained. How do we do that? And it just helps people change their paradigm to look at things somewhat differently, to have it as how they have done historically. And I must say, at Deutsche Bank, we had the ability to change direction because we had lots of people in that organization that couldn't make up their minds. I'm not pitching this as a panacea. And actually, our cost to change direction was too high. It was too high. We had too much legacy for it not to cost a lot to change direction. And that's one of the things that I think held us back. But I think this is where, thinking about a relative cost to adapt, relative speed to adapt in relation to our competition is really important. As an old incumbent organization, you don't have to be as fast as Spotify. But you have to be faster than your competition. And Agile was always about being able to outmaneuver your competition by being able to do it quicker and cheaper.
Okay, so I mean, what I'm hearing is one of the massive advantages you had, other than, of course, you and your colleague being aces at what you do and, knowing exactly, or being in there for a while, knowing the people and all that. You had executive sponsorship, which massively helped. Have you been in a situation where you had to, I use this word likely, had to prove that this, and the executives were not necessarily bought in. How did you get them to play ball?
I think every situation there's an element of proving it. Even in the situation I described at Deutsche Bank, it was still, we had to prove it. It wasn't like this came for free. Bear in mind that in that leadership team, there was 3 or 4 other people who really didn't want us to be there.
Okay.
Right? None of this is easy. But if you go in with the mindset of thinking, how can I make the reasons to them compelling? And you begin to orient yourself to proving something, to showing some results, and to understand that I mentioned various gaps earlier around motivation and around environment. And there's a communication gap. And I think sometimes doing what we do, unless you can own the narrative, unless you can tell the story, unless you can turn up to certain, and people happily flame me on this, I don't really mind, but in big organizations, like, you need to be able to walk into a room with confidence and state your case. And when someone challenges you with something which is, with a fact or a pseudo fact, some kind of false truth, you've got to stand up for yourself. A lot of the time in organizations, you don't get very far without a bit of a, I was going to use the word fight, but without a certain level of dissent.
Okay.
And you need to be able to take that dissent and give that dissent. And so I think of my time, when I go back to Royal Bank of Scotland, the first time that we used Scrum, which then turned into my first time that we used less, we spent, it was interesting because we were working with a vendor platform, which was notoriously bad. And anyone who's worked in finance has heard of a platform called Calypso. I'm not sure if I can get done for slander, or Apocalypso or Collapso, many names. Don't get me wrong, great company. It was a product that sold very well, but it was very difficult to deliver. Right? And I use the word deliver, actually, to hand it over, let alone customize it. So what we did was something at the very beginning. We said, well, how do we solve the problem of automated testing on this? If we want to be able to adapt quickly, and we know all these pains that come from using this, because we had some seasoned pros kind of on our team, then how do we solve the automated testing question? And everyone said it can't be done. You can't do automated testing on it. So it took us a fortnight, and we nailed it.
A fortnight?
A fortnight.
Wow.
Because we dedicated an entire sprint to saying, how do we solve this problem? What are the options? And we had experts in Calypso who are contractors we brought in, to a couple of fantastic people. One particular person who was just wonderful. But then for that person, this approach and the way we were working and our desire to be technically excellent lit a fire in them. We had another excellent developer called Mark, who is a very old friend of mine, and he had lots of experience in getting it right first time. And he always said to us, unless you set things up properly at the beginning, you'll never set things up properly ever.
At the end, yeah.
So we just made sure. So what we found was that when we had the automated testing running and we started using acceptance test-driven development, we got Gojko Adzik in to come and teach us specification by example, that we started using that. Our ability to adapt just went through the roof.
Yeah.
Relatively speaking to where we were. So then when the vendor saw what we were doing, they were like, how did you do this? When they gave us patches and we were able to test the patches and find defects, even after they've been testing it for 3 months. So like, how did you find this? Wow. So, well, because we've invested heavily in tests for acceptance test-driven development. So, and we won a lot of fans. We gained a lot of budget. The organization grew quite quickly. We gained a lot of confidence because we were able to make the reasons for people to want to invest in us compelling.
Yeah.
And I think that's for me, the most consistent way that we found to actually work with the dissent and to drive things forward isn't to focus on having a good retro. Right? It's actually saying, technically, what's holding us back? Because our ability to adapt as an organization, as a group, is always going to be hindered by our ability to adapt at the technical level. So my biggest piece of advice to anyone that's listening, if they can do, is if you want to kind of drive some change and you want to kind of get this bandwagon started, look at the technical aspect. Find that way to make your technical landscape easier to change. Because if you do that, one, you can react quicker, you can test quicker. Secondly, for teams that you've got working on that, will be happier and have less fear. If teams have less fear, they'll hang around for longer, they'll be more engaged. And I think for me, that's the one consistent thing we found extraordinarily beneficial.
Now, as you can see, I'm writing notes. I'm taking it all in because you see, yeah, because so I have this idea. I call it buying political will.
Mm-hmm.
And what I explain by that is if you step into an organization as a scrum master and there are things that are structurally not optimal for either the team or the organizational structure, it's almost impossible for you to land on your first as a contractor, as a consultant, and go, that is wrong, that is wrong. They don't know who you are, they don't know why they should trust you. So I've always said, find something to pick up to win at. That they can go, oh, this guy actually knows his stuff. And that gives you a platform to start to speak. It doesn't necessarily guarantee that they will listen to you the first time, but it just means they hand you the microphone and they go, okay, yeah, he's spoken, he's fine. He seems to know what he's talking about. And then the more you do that, the more it becomes apparent that actually, maybe we should listen to this guy. Maybe he actually has something to say. And eventually you get the opportunity, but it's a long game. But you take it down to another level, which is, like you said, look at technical output. What can you improve there? What can you grab a hold of and change there? And once you do that, because like you said, because I remember I worked in a particular organization where they're from pushing the button to going live through their environments in like 2 weeks, and they were fine with it. So, and all I just did was I first of all I was like, no, are you aware that you're as agile as your deployment process? You can take you 2 days to finish stuff. If it takes you 2 weeks to get to the customer's hand, that's how agile you are. Don't deceive yourself. So first thing I do is I sat down with a couple of people in the meeting, and I was like, okay, why does it take 2 weeks? And like what you said about when you did at Deutsche Bank, just had a room of people, the right people, had a conversation, and we're able to in that room bring it down to 5 days. A couple of things were owned by that person, owned by that person, and in about a month, we're gotten it down to you could push the button to go live, and before close of play, it's live. And it didn't take much effort. It was just everybody looking and going, what can we do about this? Just having that, land the mural to go, okay, this is where we currently are. What can we in this room do to improve stuff?
And that's the one thing that's been lost over the years. I think that the lack of focus on technical excellence has been some of the reasons why many organizations struggle with anything in the agile universe, let's say, that actually that continuous focus on technical excellence and actually really make it, because when you look back at agile, it was created for software development. It was created by a lot of consultants who had a history of programming. They were talking about small teams working on things collaboratively with really great minds. And when that gets lost and it just becomes a way to manage a project,
manage people,
manage people, then like you don't get anywhere near the payoff.
So now we looked at agility at different levels. One thing that's always concerned me when we look at scaled agility or scaling teams and multiple teams is that a lot of people, we focus on we're going to get a lot of work done through these teams. But my concern has always been, are they aware that you're going to multiply the feedback? Does the organization have the bandwidth to handle this amount of feedback? What are your thoughts on that?
On my podcast years ago, I had a guy called Jürgen de Schmidt who came on.
Okay, and we were for the episode.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Jürgen. And we were talking about large-scale Scrum adoptions. And he was talking about one of the less guides, which we've always found very beneficial, which is to start with a small batch of people, say around 50 or so, and make it work for them. Like really make it work, top to bottom, slice through the organization, really make it work. Right? Because when you enact any kind of organizational change, the time that teams spend learning and resolving issues, especially if you've then restructured the teams in some way, it takes time for them to figure out how to work together. It takes time for them to learn different parts of the code base, different code bases. It takes time to resolve issues because they're bringing things together in a different way. And yeah, really skilled technical people will look at these problems and say, this is a technical problem. Let's just try and solve it. So you're right. If you do too much at one time, then either nothing happens, you don't get any issues in learning because you haven't really made any change.
Yeah.
You just get people having more meetings.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Or you do get some issues and some learning, which means you have done some real change. Hopefully that change is in line with what you're trying to optimize for. And so
Yeah.
you need to do that in a small batch so you can figure out, actually, have we got the skills to deal with the feedback? What skills do we need to deal with the feedback? Like telling a manager, you need to now deal with this feedback. These impediments will be coming up, and we need your help to remove those to increase the capability of your product creation group. Isn't a knowledge gap. That isn't something you just tell someone.
Yeah.
There are skills that are needed. There's differences to the way that person is probably remunerated or rewarded. There's ways you to find to motivate them. Maybe they're not the right person to shepherd. They have the growth and capability that's required to make that really work. Maybe you need to find someone else. And if you do too much at once, your political credibility, your social credibility in an organization will just be used up.
Yeah.
So I find that by working in a smallish area and understanding what you're trying to optimize for, and then focus on making it work well and making the reasons for people to want to join compelling. The moment you have people turning around and saying, oh, actually, we'd love to go and work in that part of the organization, then you're winning. Now, this is a technique which I believe was mentioned by John Cutter, I think. John Cutter, no, Cotter, sorry, with Cotter's change model, which is the idea of a parallel organization.
Okay.
And so if you can imagine a circle, and that's your organization, and then you want to implement a new way of doing something. If you draw a little circle inside that circle, it's going to be very hard for that little circle of change to succeed when you've got the weight of the system crushing it.
Yeah.
If you find a way to carve out a circle and you click outside that circle and then make that work well, and then grow the circle on the outside, all the time decreasing the old circle, and run this parallel organization, I've always found that's worked more effectively. It's slower.
It's a long game. Yeah.
It's a long game, but we're dealing with complex change. And so if we rush it, it will just all go wrong. And it allows us to prove things and to learn. And the easiest way I've always found of doing that was just to say, let's look at the upcoming work.
Okay.
And let's pick a piece of work that's the kind of the Goldilocks piece of work, not too big, not too small. And let's say that piece of work is the piece of work we're going to try in this new way. And then as it's working, then as other new pieces of work come in, we say, okay, great. When that new work just gets added in. And so what we do, we organically grow the new organization while slowly kind of winding down the old organization because we've throttled the work that's going to it.
That's a very smart way of doing it. Yeah, yeah. Because in the end, when you think of it, when you pick up the small piece of work, you get the opportunity to actually walk through your processes. Are they optimized? Are they better? What's that structure like? And then you can make those iterative changes.
Yeah.
Pull new work. Every time you pull new work, then it's time to experiment. Is this the best? And once you get it, I won't say right, but once you get it in the right direction, then you can, pull in more.
Yeah. I mean, when we embraced, as they were called back then, they're still called now feature teams, which are very akin to what Marty Kagan would call product teams. I think there's a big misnomer in the community about what feature teams are and product teams, but teams that own solving the customer problem end to end. That when you start to build teams like that, they begin to solve lots of problems, right? As I mentioned before, particularly in the way that software is architected. And that it's slow to begin with, and then they solve the problems. And as new teams join, do you know what they're finding? Actually, it's quite a pleasant environment to work in because the things they were scared of doing before no longer exist.
Yeah.
And the things that caused them pain before no longer exist because they've been solved.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that this is easy. It absolutely isn't. Picking the first piece of work, making sure it's the right size, having to make the hard decision to let a new piece of work go to the old organization because you're not quite ready yet, are difficult decisions, which is why you need that higher level support.
Yeah, it's paramount. It is paramount. Yeah.
But at the same time, when we did this at Deutsche Bank, we were insulated because the work was still going to get done. And worst case, it just got done the way it always had been done. So people kind of expected it to happen in that way anyway.
Okay.
Best case, it went to the new part of the organization and happened in a slightly better way. So for us, we kind of saw it as a win-win. And because then actually you do have that choice about where the work goes, then do you know what the absolute worst case? It will just be the same you always got.
Same old way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's very interesting. Wow. Okay. There's a lot going on in my head. Because you drop nuggets left, right, and center. Because I'm looking at here. You mentioned in Dorship. I'm just thinking of someone the powerful session that you had where because when you think of it, right? I mean, in the agile principle, we talk about business and developers working together. What that emphasizes that to solve this complex problem, we need collaboration. And you brought that out. You said, okay, let's have this session. Let's look at how we currently work. Not how we would like to work, but how we currently work. And let's see how we can improve it. And you find that when you do that, you find there's a lot of bloat in different spots. You get rid of the bloat, you strengthen the chain, it's smoother. Like I call it the runway. So you level the bumps on the runway because the plane has to take off, right? So you level the bumps on the runway, and it's a lot better. This question I have here, right? I don't know if you find it interesting, but it's always a question that comes up into my talk with people. And I always say, you've got a lot of information, a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience. We are in this game together. You have battle scars. If you were to walk into we're both in the UK. So if you were to walk into the TARDIS and you appeared in 2004 and you walked right in front of younger Ben Maynard, what would you tell him?
Just it's an interesting one because it isn't easy for me to answer. I had a interesting childhood, which gave me a reasonably unhealthy desire to succeed. And I think that 20 years ago was probably when I started channeling that desire to succeed into ways that probably weren't going to let me in prison.
Okay. It's good to know.
Yeah. So, really, really checkered past. And so if I was to go back, I would just tell him to keep doing, just to stick true to where you want to go. Right? Just don't lose that drive to succeed. And I think that's the most important thing. Going back 20 years, what I would have been. It was actually a very interesting point in my life because at that point I was working at JP Morgan as a temp, actually in a call center. And I wanted to succeed. And even when I look back to working in this, it's called corporate actions in JP Morgan. We're ringing up global clients, getting corporate action instructions, and looking at the process we were doing, looking at our visualization, looking at how the work was managed. Like my mind was just full of all the ways it could be improved. And so I've always had that kind of process improvement kind of mindset and wanted to make things better. And and it's that gave me the opportunity because I 20 years ago I was doing that. 10 years later I was not even 10 years later, 4 years after that I was a vice president at RBS.
Wow. That's an improvement.
Yeah. And then another 5 years after that I was a director at Deutsche Bank. And it just came from having this real dogged mindset to want to improve things and improve a process. So yeah, I'd just say just improve those processes, Ben. Just keep on improving those processes.
You touched on something that I've had as a theory, right? Anytime, I've had people ask me that, I'm a project manager. I've gotten to the end of, I don't like this way of working. Actually, someone told me I don't like this way of working. I'm always, marshalling the troops. That I've looked at this Scrum way of working and I'm thinking, do you think I'm fitted for being a Scrum Master product owner? And one thing I always have, when they ask me that question, I'm always wondering, first thing I ask myself is, why are you asking me? One. Then number two, I'm always like, there's something that I know that resonates with most of the agilists that I've spoken to, which is at the core of our being is the desire to improve whatever we see. And you just said it, process improvement is at the core of our being. We look at it. I mean, I remember when I was younger, this is in high school, my first year in high school, And my very best friend, we were going somewhere and he said, "Oh, let's go this way." And I remember telling him, because he was shocked by my response. I was like, "That's not an effective path. It take us too long. We can go this way, it's shorter." And he was like, "Why are you thinking like that?" And I was thinking to myself, and I was asking him, "Why aren't you thinking like that? Why would we waste 10 minutes going to where we can do it in 5 minutes that way?" And I've always been that way. I look at something and I'm thinking, even with my kids, when I take them to school, I want to leave the house by a particular time because I want to be sure I get to go by a particular time. And if you miss it, I'm always like, okay, next time, let's try 5 minutes earlier. It's just the way my mind works. So when you said it, I was like, yes, confirmed. I can
Yeah.
actually I can patent that theory now.
Yeah, but I find this a really interesting thing though, is that
Mm,
attitude and the appreciation that I think this is the appreciation that some of us comes from is that time is really precious. We don't have much time on this earth.
mm,
And I think that for me, the marked difference between a good product person and a good agile person and one that is, I say good and bad is very harsh judgment, but the ones that I gravitate towards and the ones I
yeah.
respect and I admire are the ones who have that entrepreneurial mindset, the ones that look at
Mm,
something and say, you know, if this was my company, would I want it to work this way?
mm,
And I think that sometimes it's difficult to have that mindset if you're in a big organization or if you've never experienced. Actually, we've only got £10,000 to get this product to market.
mm.
So, what do I need to learn to make that happen? Why need to, years ago, I had a reasonably successful web-based tool for festival scheduling. And I coded it all in my spare time at uni.
Oh wow.
And I loved doing it, and I loved kind of slowly refining it and improving it. But then I also knew my time was really scarce, so I needed to focus on the things that the users wanted.
Mm,
The start we've got now. We haven't got all the money in the world to go and hire a
mm,
team of developers. So every decision that we make about what needs to go out needs to be the one that we have the most confidence in will pay off. And if that means I need to go and learn various technical things, then I have done. I've dusted off my ability to migrate servers and to learn WordPress and WooCommerce and to write specs again and all of that because that's what's needed. And I think
yeah.
that I think having that eye for improvement, appreciating that everything is scarce
Mm,
and you want to have the biggest impact throughout everything you do, I think is a fantastic mindset to have. And it's one I think that what you articulated, that's for me, it's just the same thing. It's just wanting to have the biggest impact in the shortest time possible.
mm, mm. I like this. I like this. I like this. Okay, so another question comes to mind. So now this is Ben. Ben has been doing this for years. You've worked with large organizations. You've, you know, transformed ways of working. So there's this guy that listens to us right now. He's new in the game. And it's like, oh my God, I want to do stuff like Ben has done. What would you tell him or her to go, okay, as you're starting, these are the things that you should either look out for, jump into, avoid? What would you tell that person?
Yeah. It's really hard because the hippie in me just wants to say, like, figure out what motivates you.
Okay.
Figure out what motivates you and do your best to become an expert in that. And
Mm,
if you find that that isn't going to pay, then find something else that motivates you. But you have to have that internal fire, I think, to succeed in something, to not
mm,
give up. And I've been really fortunate that I've just had a long chain of different things that I've just found so interesting and exciting.
mm,
Whether that was finding test-driven development 20 odd years ago, whether it is finding Scrum or less, whether it was finding Kanban, whether it is kind of going into the product world and getting involved in some things around behavioral science or looking at kind of product strategy and product vision, like I found all those things so interesting that I've found it really easy to motivate myself to learn about these things. And now we have chatbots like ChatGPT.
yeah.
I find that ChatGPT is one of the best teachers I've ever had.
Mm,
So perhaps if I was going to say, what can people do? Like, find out what motivates you, whatever field that's in, right?
yeah.
And then use a chatbot and just play around, learn more about it, and just try and find ways to monetize it in some way. Try and find ways to like find the opportunity to use it. Like when I look back to my first ever time that we used large scale Scrum, I would sit on the train in the morning and I had this big fat book, which is I don't know where it is now. No, it's actually it's at the bottom of a pile here.
Okay.
This one, this book here, Practices for Scaling Agile and Lean Development.
Okay.
And it's it's about 1,000 different experiments.
Oh,
Try
nice.
this, avoid this, try this. And so I'd read this in the morning, and then I'd get into the office, and there'd always be one experiment that I'd read, and I'd be like, Mark, Prayesh, team, like, I've just read this, let's try it. But most days would come in and just try something. And because I was just really motivated to do that. And and I find that that's how we ended up with our first less case study, was because we just tried so many of the experiments that we just evolved to look like a less organization, a less product group. And that's I wish I could give you a better answer, but
That's really powerful. Because, like you said, some of the things that we do, obviously, we've crunched your experience into a couple of minutes. But like you said, in several instances, you said some of these things is hard. And if you don't have that fire burning within you, it's very hard to get from outside. The outside just add more wood to the fire, but you need to have the fire burning within you.
You do. I mean, if you're a Scrum Master and you were a project manager and you hate Scrum Mastery, but you feel that project management was something you loved, then go and buy a new book on project management. Follow there's still loads of project managers out there. There's still lots of projects to be managed. There's just lots of different ways to do it now, where you can lean on so much from the Agile world. But if Scrum Master doesn't light your fire, but project management did, then go and find a way to become an expert project manager. Go and hang out. I mean, there's a guy called James Lutit, wrote a book called, I've got it here, Leading Impactful Teams, which is about project management. Brilliant book, awesome person, making a whole career out of being a project manager, but not your standard one. And I think this is an important thing. Life's too short to do things that you hate or you dislike.
Yeah.
So just try and find ways to monetize what you enjoy. And I don't mean be a content creator or the rest of it. I mean, actually, look at your job, look at what motivates you, find that bit in the Venn diagram that overlaps, and just begin to try some stuff.
You know, when I finished university, I had my dad. I went to see him one day. He was with one of his friends, and his friend asked me what I want to do, and I told him I'm looking at this, looking at that. And his friend said there are two kinds of jobs you can do. There's one that pays the bills, and there's one that you love. God bless if you find one that answers both. But if you don't, you must identify each one and give it the attention it requires.
Yeah. You know? Well, you look at the most successful people, they don't give up. You know, giving up is a big phrase. There are absolutely times when these successful people do give up on something. But by giving up, they're saying, let's not go down that avenue. Let's consolidate.
They call time on the experiment and move to something else.
Let's learn and let's just keep on going forward. But it's that dogged determination. You know, I'm very fortunate to be where I am, and I don't quite know where I am, why I'm here, how I ended up in this situation. But I think that a large part of it is just down to the fact that I am quite dogged. And I've got a fire inside me, which is wonderful for getting businesses going and wonderful for being successful in different avenues. It's also a terrible burden from a mental health perspective. So, yeah, it's a double-edged sword. So, yeah, I would love to be able to go. I often think about it. People write these fantastic books, you know, and they manage to kind of codify what it is that they believe has made them successful. I don't think I could ever do that.
I actually think you can. I think you can. I think you express it very clearly. I think that the Ben and I know that I've listened to a couple of your podcasts. I think it's because you're busy. I think if you sat down for 2 months and put your thoughts down, you have it. I'm serious.
Maybe one day I'll take 2 months. Let's see if I can sell a business, and then I'd sit down for 2 weeks.
Okay, so there's this last question, not last question, but one question I have, almost the last one anyway, that I learned recently. I don't know if it was your podcast. I can't remember whose podcast I listened to. And the person asked the question that asked the person you're interviewing one question that usually you never think of, which is, what question should I have asked you?
Ah, that's one of mine. That is, because I learned that in my coaching education. Is that when you're learning how to coach and you're never quite sure what question to ask, like what question, yeah. And so being asked it myself, I realized actually what a horrible question that is. What question should you have asked me? Yeah, I don't know. I wonder. I know the one question you could have asked me, which would have challenged me actually, is and you mentioned it, I think in some of the warm up, is what is product agility?
Okay.
Because it is a slightly amorphous thing, and no, not many people talk about it. My podcast is called it. I spend a lot of my time talking about it. I may need to make more of a thing and get some stuff out there. But for me, a product agility, when I decided to use a phrase for the podcast and begin talking about it, was because my fear was that agile was going to get thrown away without the good parts of it being acknowledged and kept in some way, right? And I could see that product was on the rise and more people wanted to get into product. And yeah, full transparency, I go to many conferences with the podcast, and there's some agile conferences that I love. And when I went to Productized in Portugal, it was a very, very different affair. Very, very different affair, because these were amazing product leaders. And I found it really inspiring to be there around these people. And I think that when they're at the product conference, agile is a joke. It's almost like a pantomime. People mention agile and there's like boos and hisses.
Oh, wow.
Because it's got such a bad reputation. You then talk to the people who gave the talks and like, no, it's absolutely got a place. But I say that because I know I'm going to get a reaction. And so for me, I wanted to just help people appreciate that there's lots wrong with the agile industry. But if we go back to the Agile Manifesto and let's look at some of the things that it said, and let's take it for what it was, and then we take that in the context of broader product discovery and creation and ideation, and actually try and find a way to get the best of both worlds. Because the way that I've always described it is that if you imagine that Agile is a very basic, but reliable car, it enables you to go forward and backwards. You can steer it, you can park it. It's got indicators. It's great. It will get you from A to B. And you can tune the engine, you can replace bits and make it go faster, you can affect the steering, and that's great. But how the hell do you know where you're going?
Yeah.
How do you know on a busy motorway if there's something in your blind spot? How do you put something else on other than the radio if you get bored listening to the radio? How do you make it a more comfortable driving experience? How do you get to your destination with confidence? And that's what the product world brings. It brings things like GPS, like SatNav. It brings things like Android Auto or the Apple equivalent. It gives you blind spot sensors. It gives you rear parking cameras and front cameras. It gives you all the things that make it a much safer, reliable, and more confident journey.
Yeah.
And that's for me what product agility, when you view it that way, for me, that's what it is. If agile is the engine, it's the chassis, it's that but it's the bones of the car which make it a good car. Product's all the things we need to do to make sure we're going to get to the right destination.
So many thoughts. That's really powerful. Yeah, because, like we said earlier on, that we're getting to a point where, like you said, I said it somewhere one time that for a lot of people, agile is what's done to them, right? They're told they have to work this way, but they don't see the customer, they don't see the business objective, they don't see the organization's goals and aspirations. All they just see is a couple of activities. it's unconnected. We have that meeting, we have that meeting, we have that meeting, we have that meeting, and then we go. And we have that meeting, we have that meeting, we have that meeting, and we go. But they don't see the purpose of it all. They don't see what is the organization's goal in terms of time to market or value, or are we experimenting with a certain idea? Is there something we're trying to achieve that we don't, we want to 5x our income. We're trying a couple of things. They don't see that.
Mm.
So it's really powerful that you said that. So to our listeners, and thank you for your time that you spent with us so far. So to our listeners, how can we get in touch with Ben?
Well,
Like,
LinkedIn's a great place.
okay. Mm-hmm.
And probably I'm happy to talk to most people on LinkedIn about most things. Um,
And
if
then
the
you are also a trainer. So can you tell our listeners?
Yeah, sure. So I through my company Sheave, we offer lots of different training. Large scale Scrum training is one of our most popular courses. So certified less practitioner. It's not about Scrum. And I wouldn't say it's about organizational design per se, although some people would pitch it that way. For me, it's about understanding really how organizations work from a systemic perspective.
Mm,
And the effects of having optimization goals which don't align to things like adaptability. So it's a fantastic course, and that's a 3-day course. So we're offering for the first time in Ireland actually for the next couple of months,
that's it.
which is going to be really fun to get out there. We've got do training from the back of the room. Again, it's really, really popular course.
Mm,
To anybody that says stuff and they want people to remember it, it's a great way to structure workshops and training. It isn't just about education. So yes, that's a course we run in London. And we've also got some IC Agile courses. So we've got IC Agile Team Coach and Team Facilitator, which we've just enhanced now with some extra kind of AI goodness. So now we're helping people use chatbots, specifically things like ChatGPT and Bard, to really up their coaching and facilitation game. And this isn't just a stupid little add-on. Right, I
mm,
think one of the things that we're going to be doing in the facilitation course, for example, is we always used to get people to look at the Miroverse. For the
mm.
last activity, look in the Miroverse, find a Miro template. Very, very rubbish, generally speaking. I always find there's lots of stuff on there, and it does. I don't know, it's a bit like it's just a bit boring, I think. So instead, what we do is we teach people how to use ChatGPT to actually have it design a game for you, and then
Okay.
we'll
Oh,
show people
wow.
how to use Miro to then create the game and run the game that ChatGPT is then designed for you. So we take you through how to write prompts, how to get the right information about it, how to tweak it, how to change things, and then how to actually implement it using Miro or any other tool. And there's a number of different ways that we're using things like ChatGPT to help. And the goal is for anyone that comes on the courses, they get a free month of ChatGPT 4. And some
That's
similar
nice.
with the custom GPTs that we've created. So
Mm,
yeah, so they're our main training courses. We've got many other associates and affiliates that we're going to be working with over the next few months, but they're the main ones. And yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, Ben Maynard. I'm the one wearing. Actually, I'm wearing the same yellow t-shirt I'm wearing today. Look at that! I do have
I
other
do.
t-shirts.
I'm sure. So thank you very much, Ben. So to our listeners, you find Ben's LinkedIn, his website. Link on his website, the podcast link is there, but I also put the link separate. So you have the website, the podcast link, then also his LinkedIn, and you can contact Ben. And you see his training schedule as well. And Ben has been phenomenal with us today. So thank you very much, Ben. I've believe you me, there's some podcasts that when you finish recording, I'm sure you experience it too. After you sit down, you're just thinking, wow, looking at your notes. Because in the podcast, I learn, we share, and the aim is to also educate people to see, like I said at the podcast, when I started the podcast, we're going to bring people that have done stuff so we can actually learn how to do stuff. Because in the end, when you think of it, like I always tell people, if you buy your iPhone, it comes out in September. You've never once considered did they use Kanban or Scrum or less or whatever.
Mm.
It's they know their context and they're able to apply agile methods and frameworks and tips and tricks to get it out to you every time. And that's what it's all about. It's about getting like Ben rightly corrected. It's about value creation and also being able to deliver the value to the customers the right way and also even validate the value. So that's what it's all about. It's not just the mechanics of having sessions and meetings. No, there's a purpose behind the meetings. Like I always tell people, when you look at the Scrum Guide, you hear stuff like it's a formal opportunity to do something. What they are saying is that thing's meant to be happening organically, but if you miss at any point, you can do it here. So in other words, there's a formation that's going to happen, not just the activities, but the spirit behind it. So thank you very much, Ben. So to our listeners, that is a wrap for today's wonderful, mind-blowing. I'm sure you felt it like I'm feeling it. Like I'm still looking at my notes. Wonderful episode of Agile Matrix podcast. We hope you found our discussions with Ben illuminating and inspiring as we explore the transformative power of product agility. Remember, the journey to agility is ongoing, right? It's an ongoing journey, and there's always more to learn, more to discover, more to experience. So for that reason, I'm telling you, don't miss out on future episodes of the Agile Matrix podcast as I speak to different experts in the industry, people that have actually handled these things and bring about actionable strategies to propel your organization, your team, or even yourself forward in the Agile arena. So what am I telling you? Make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated to all things Agile. Join our growing community of Agile enthusiasts. Subscribe. Don't forget that every episode that we bring to you brings fresh perspectives and invaluable knowledge to fuel your Agile aspirations. So together, let's embrace agility and unlock potentials in your organizations. So until next time, keep innovating and keep iterating. So see you in the next episode of Agile Matrix podcast. Thanks for coming on. And thank you very much, Ben, for sharing your thoughts and your insights with us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.